All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live session with Teradata and AWS. My name is Brian Wood. I'm Director and Cloud Advocate at Teradata. And I'm going to be joined by David Potes, who's AWS Manager, Solutions Architecture, Data and Analytics, plus Machine Learning. David, how are you?
I'm wonderful, and thanks, Brian, for the intro. Really excited to be here, and we're going to talk about 5 big trends that we're seeing. I've spent a lot of time in the field over the past several years, and over the last 6 months, the field, since you don't get out much these days. Really, rather than bore you with an agenda, I just want to dive right in and illustrate what we're seeing in the market. So 5 top trends. Number one, and we've seen this in analytics over the years, something that is innovative and exotic becomes a trusted solution. And we're seeing that with the data lake right now. It's at the foundation of many of the modern analytic structures that I see. And tens of thousands of data lakes are in AWS. And for customers that haven't moved to the data lake format, they're all in some stage of adoption. And it made a lot of sense when storage was limited and expensive to really carefully transform, edit, and curate your data before sending it over to the expensive data warehousing tools of the time. You really had to leave things on the cutting room floor, right? You had to make decisions ahead of time on what you might need, and humans are terrible at making predictions. That's essentially why machine learning exists. With Amazon S3 continually getting cheaper over time, it really starts to drive the marginal cost of that next bit of data towards zero. And with exabyte scale, there's really there are limits, there are physical laws of the universe, but in kind of a practical sense, there's virtually no limits on how much data you can store. So we really see, if you take as a group the most innovative companies that we work with, we really see these companies really kind of upending that paradigm and storing everything. And the idea is to move curation to the data consumer rather than asking data engineers to predict which data is important or will be important in the future, right? So we want to put the decision making in the hands of the analysts. And fun fact, there's about 2 million people in the US that have analyst in their working title in some way. So a lot of people out there looking to make decisions. And the data lake enables customers to extend or evolve their data warehouse architecture. You can store data in any format, including those that have yet to be invented at this time. And it's secured, compliant, and auditable by design. You can audit it. That's built into the structure. And what's cool is customers can run any kind of analytics on top of the data lake, whether historical, real-time, or to make future predictions. And by decoupling that storage and the compute, it kind of gives you 2 dials to scale both independently. I talk to customers all the time. They say, hey, this is great, but I don't have a data lake yet. How do I get started? And no problem there. We do have a tool. It's called Lake Formation. And it makes it really easy to set up that data lake. And you know that it's secure and efficient by design. It uses security primitives and scaling mechanisms to kind of give you that right start. And to really kind of give you an idea of the scale that you can achieve, Amazon.com is a great example. So our friends on the .com side embarked on a data lake architecture. They're running on a lot of Oracle that did not scale. So building out this architecture doubled the amount of data that the .com side can analyze. And we're already talking a lot of data to start with, right? They went from 50 to 100 petabytes, which is an insane amount of data. And it supports over 1,600 or 600,000 analytics jobs per day. So if we can do it, you can do it. Brian, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, how we're tracking so far.
No, you're totally right, David. I mean, data lakes are huge in multiple senses, huge in terms of volume, scale, but also just in terms of the opportunity that customers have to combine relational structured data, traditionally in a data warehouse, with all this semi-structured, unstructured data, and a whole range of data types in a data lake. And in the past, it was used to be that these were separate entities and customers would use different people, different environments, different types of analytics in these separate areas, and then kind of manually have to join them together and make sense of it, or use a subset of some of the data lake data because it's spread all over multiple clusters and things. And what Vantage on AWS does, the Teradata software using AWS infrastructure, an as a service environment, enables enterprises to combine, to literally join data warehousing and data lakes and analytics in one integrated platform. So it's tied together and it makes it much easier for customers to combine their relational data with their data lake data and get better analytics, because if you're using all the data, you're getting the best analytics rather than just a subset. So totally on board and totally aligned with what you're saying there, David.
And more data good. If you just take like 3 words away from that, that is the pattern that we see. Lots of opportunities to get started. And Vantage on AWS, a really cool product that takes advantage of both platforms. So that's one. Number two, we're seeing a really large and broad Hadoop migration to the cloud with a lot of companies. They're looking at hardware refreshes 3 or 4 years ago. They weren't quite ready, right? But a lot of that hardware is coming up for refresh. And as these customers are looking at cloud-based processing, they're seeing incredibly compelling reasons, both to run away from the data center and to take advantage of the inherent capabilities of cloud computing. And when you look at the cost differential today, the on-premises environment is really at a disadvantage. You have well-known challenges around coupling storage and compute, and of course the fixed capital costs to acquire hardware. But there's also the challenge of not being able to scale up and scale down in a cost-avoidant way. And we see, in the AWS cloud, customers like FINRA, which is the regulatory agency that monitors the markets for fraud, and they can process 135 billion events per day and trillions, that's trillions with a T, of records, and still save 60% on cost, right? So this is very compelling. And one of the game changers that you can do with cloud-based Hadoop processing, like our own EMR, is you have this notion of ephemeral clusters. So basically, they spin up to process the job, they spin down when they're done, and you don't have to pay for what's not processing, as opposed to kind of that on-premises world where you bought it, right? You own it, you have to maintain it. Combine this with really effective uses of spot instances, which think of them as a much cheaper alternative to instances, but they can go away, right? So you have to architect around that to be able to take advantage. And you look at a customer like Vanguard. By moving to their Hadoop processing to EMR, they saved over $600,000 in just 5 months. Like usually these projects, there's like an ROI somewhere, but you don't see it by kind of midway through the year typically. And like most of our own analytics products, as well as a product like Teradata Vantage, this integrates nicely with S3 and thus your data lake strategy. And if you can see what I'm doing here, we're kind of building this functionality on top of the data lake. Here's yet another very compelling reason to take another look if you haven't already. I know, Brian, you have some thoughts here. Curious your take on trend number 2.
Yeah, you bet. So obviously Hadoop was a massively hyped technology, and it had its day in the sun for a good 4 to 5 years or so. And there were many claims of what Hadoop was going to do. It was going to displace the data warehouse. It was going to, drive down the cost and all sorts of ambitious claims. And we've seen that come and go. And like many technology claims that are nascent, they lots of hope and expectation, but very few kind of come to pass. And this is what we've seen with Hadoop, that many companies are moving from their not only on-prem to the cloud for not only their relational data, but their unstructured data and semi-structured within Hadoop, from an on-prem based physical infrastructure Hadoop who in the cloud like EMR, but also from Hadoop itself as a technology to object storage like S3, which I won't steal your thunder now because I expect that's coming up. But again, Vantage on AWS can connect to and analyze all the data in Hadoop in the cloud on EMR, Amazon EMR. So using a technology we call Teradata Query Grid, think of it as a bridge with push-down processing to go from Vantage proper over to in this case, the EMR environment. And it's smart enough to figure out the most efficient way to do the analytics, whether via push-down processing, meaning push the analytic to EMR and do the analytic there and then pull back the result set, or if it's a smaller data set, then just pull the data over to the database itself and do the analytic within Vantage. Either way, you're able to join with and query and use all that data in the various environments. So completely on board with what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note, to Brian's point, Hadoop is a tool in the tool belt, right? It gives you a particular advantage, but it also comes with its own disadvantages. And after way too long in this business, people love their tools, right? And they want the best tool for the job, just like I want the best tool for the job when I'm working on my house. And having a full tool belt is better than trying to fix everything with a hammer. I can assure you that. So that's two. Big trend number three. And if you've seen me talk before, or you had the experience of seeing me at reInvent, you'll know that data governance and protection is really, really high on my list, and it really should be job zero at your company. And it should have been all along, but fair is fair. Some companies didn't really, kind of dig into where their exposure was. But I can tell you that GDPR completely changed the calculus of risk for organizations, especially as it pertains to the use and safeguarding what we call PII, or personally identifiable information. The approaching governance really requires asking a lot of hard questions. And I don't mean hard as in you have to make a judgment call, but hard as in difficult to answer. You can think of the types of questions. I kind of roughly put them into three buckets. So what do I have, right? What can I do with that? And what am I actually doing right now? And the answer to these questions will then form the basis to your policy approach, as well as help you define the tools necessary to answer these questions. So I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper on the first question. What do I have? Surprisingly hard question to answer for organizations starting their journey. If we go back to the dawn of time, everything was held in an operational database, and then you would move it along. You knew exactly where it was coming from. You knew the endpoint. You could easily understand all of the data flows. Companies might have dozens of pipelines, but a single human could definitely understand that. But in the modern enterprise, you really have a situation where you have data coming at you from many directions, right? You have, I mentioned earlier, 2 million people have the job of analyst in their title. So you have a vast array of consumers, and kind of every step of the way, you have somebody having a hand in this. And this is where having a really robust data catalog is part of your strategy. You really need that canonical source of metadata or data about data to have visibility into your assets. And make no mistake, data is an asset to your business. And we have a product there that helps. We have AWS Glue, which is a serverless data cataloging and crawling tool. So it can go find data for you and will allow you to store metadata. There's also solutions out there from Informatica, from Calibra, lots of tools out there. Often analytics tools have cataloging built in. So if your needs are fairly straightforward, you probably want to start with your analytics tool before you have to go through the process of going through that vendor selection. Marketplace can help there. So using Marketplace to purchase with us gives you the ability to get it right on your AWS bill. And you'll find Vantage on Marketplace as well. So once you have visibility, you can start to do things like de-identify data. And this is really the function of masking or tokenizing data. I'll talk about the difference in just a second. But one of my truisms is the easiest PII to protect is the stuff that's not there. So the policy will tell you if you even need this data. And in many cases, you don't. One example would be a U.S. Social Security number. For the most part, that data is not necessary unless you're using credit checks, right? So maybe we want to just mask that right at the entry point because nobody needs to see that. Adding that information adds risk, and really we're trying to make a measure of risk and avoid unnecessary risks. And tokenization is really also redacts the data, but gives you a token so that you can still maintain relationships. So super useful if you need to join on something, but the actual information needs to be protected. This might be if you were tracking by credit card number, for example. And now that you have visibility, this gives you an opportunity to use tools like master data management. If I'm in your corporate records as David and Dave, and I appear to be two different entities, probably not since I have an uncommon last name, but if I appear to be two different entities, you're actually fragmenting that data and making it less valuable than a whole. And one interesting play on master data management, we looked at a product called Tamer, and they're actually using ML to drive some of this approach. We'll talk about ML a little bit more later. But once you kind of have that the data managed and you have a catalog to store things, now you can do really cool things, like, for example, having your users rate data sources and it starts to bubble up the best data sets in search. If you have 10,000 data sets with customer in the name, kind of hard to find which one is super, super valuable. The other two questions, what can I do and what I'm actually doing, and the delta between those trends is, or the delta between those two really falls into trend number 4. But I want to pause and get Brian's thoughts here before we continue on.
Awesome. Yeah, so let me riff a bit, because you covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
First of all, governance, security, obviously very important, not just GDPR, but enterprises in general. In fact, the foundation of our as-a-service offerings from the beginning has always been security. And that's why we provision customers in their own virtual private cloud, their own VPC, single tenant environments, so no sharing of database, no sharing of infrastructure. So not only do customers not have to worry about the noisy neighbor syndrome in terms of shared resources from a performance standpoint, but just that extra assurance from a privacy and security standpoint. We integrate with all the industry standard tools. So Glue is a first-party cloud service, but also companies like Elation and Informatica and all the usual suspects. So that is something that, again, enterprises have a vast analytic ecosystem, and Teradata understands that we're just a portion of that, a very important portion, in terms of data warehouse and the sort of single source of truth, but we know we need to interoperate with everything. So when you use Teradata software, you don't have to get rid of or change any of your preferred tools or even languages. So support for SQL and R and Python, SAS and Java, and on down the line. So integration with ecosystem tools, integration with first-party services. I mentioned Glue. We talked about data lakes before. I just want to plug the native integration with Amazon S3, something we call native object store. So tied in directly and optimized for performance with S3. So there is query grid to data stores like Hadoop and Oracle and other repositories on-prem. And then there's native object store, which is tied in natively with Vantage. It's part of the subscription price. There's no extra charge for this, natively to S3. And so that's part of it. And then the last thing I'll say on governance is not only from a security governance standpoint, but a financial governance standpoint. It's so easy to spin up environments in the cloud and costs kind of run away because it doesn't really show up on the CFO's radar until a couple months down the line when the costs start stacking up. That's a possibility. But with Vantage in the cloud, because it's the same software as on premises, it's much easier for IT teams, business analysts, citizen data scientists to use the same policies and procedures on AWS as they may have done on-prem. So same, you don't have to learn new tools, new processes, new policies. It's just extending that environment. And some workloads will be well suited in one environment, say on-premises, if that's where something is now. New workloads, very popular to spin those up on AWS. And the cool thing is it's the same. So from a governance standpoint, you're not creating a bunch of data silos that are all independent and not viewable from other users. It's all one collective ecosystem. You don't have to worry about where the data is. Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Is it in Vantage? Is it in S3? Is it in EMR? Once you set up those connections, you just query, and Vantage figures it out. That's its job. So let the software sophistication do the work rather than, smart DBAs who have to constantly spin all the plates to keep it all tied together. That's what Vantage does. So, David, back to you.
And I will say smart and expensive DBAs, they know who they are. Yeah, and really, just want to underscore that I think one of the advantages of Vantage is that hybrid view. So, your folks working on top of the platform don't have to learn something new right off the bat, right? It gives them an opportunity to a bridge to we'll call it a bridge to the present. It's not a bridge to the future anymore, but a bridge to the present and be able to do that. So thanks for that, Brian. Number 4, and this really gets into the delta between thinking of your data, what you can do, and what you are doing. And that can really cut both ways, right? Obviously, exceeding the legal and or policy restrictions of data is problematic, but pretty straightforward. You can solve it by that classic combination of people, process, and tools. For example, train your people, both the technical and the business folks, on the limitations and their responsibilities of what we call data stewardship. Get the right tooling in place, like we discussed previously. And kind of the third thing is to build mechanisms that really combine the technology, the policy, and the practical procedures that people actually perform so that you can continuously assess and mitigate risk. Because ultimately, it's a risk reduction exercise repeated forever. And I don't know if you read The Economist. I actually do. Great. The Economist famously declared in 2017 that data is the new oil. A bold statement, but really meaning that the aggregate value of the world's data at that time, and by their analysis, had exceeded the value of the world's oil. And this analogy holds water, if you will, because data assets are often yet to be discovered, just like fossil fuels in the ground, or if known, they still have to be extracted for monetization. And this is really important because you have the ability to augment data where it's missing and or enrich data. So say that you wanted to go to a provider to find things out about companies like a Dun & Bradstreet. They have that data. You can join it with what you have already. And if you've done the right work to get your data in shape, it's cataloged, it's secured, it's encrypted, then you also have an opportunity to be a data provider. And this could be something where you're working with your own second parties, like a payroll provider or a business partner, to join your data sets, and could extend all the way to true third-party monetization of your data. Can you de-identify data and actually make money off of that asset? You can, and I've definitely seen companies do that, but it was challenging up until kind of the middle of last year. A lot of challenges for both the subscriber and the data provider. But like many things, I'm here with a solution. We do have a product that helps. It is called AWS Data Exchange. And really what it solves is both on the subscriber side and the provider side. For subscribers, it really simplifies access and the acquisition of data. And for publishers, it really streamlines the process of both acquiring customers, because you're part of a marketplace, as well as fulfillment. How do you securely deliver that? How do you get paid for it? All of those things. So for example, property insurers can subscribe to data to analyze historical weather patterns so that they can calibrate insurance coverage requirements in different geographies. Definitely feel this one right now. Restaurants could subscribe to population and location data to identify the next market for expansion. Right now, there's over 1,000 data products in there from over 80 data providers, including companies like Thomson Reuters, Dun & Bradstreet, and smaller boutique players with really interesting data sets. So the point here is that if you've done all the right things that we've talked about to date, this is an opportunity to expand your business, potentially grow the top line, but at the very least, enrich your data to make better decisions. So I do want to get Brian's thoughts on this before we go into number 5, and then I'll have to talk pretty fast in case we go over, but number 5 is absolutely critical. Brian?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I'm cognizant of the time. Normally these are half hour. We'll go a little long, maybe 10 minutes long, because I see some questions coming in. So I guess a couple things. One, I failed to mention in the governance part, Teradata has something we call data DNA, and it's a way for customers to track the lineage of data. Where did it come from? Who's accessed it? What changes? And basically see like human genome type DNA to see the past and ancestry type information, but on data. And so that's part of a capability inherent within Teradata software. And so check out or talk to your Teradata account team about data DNA. In terms of some of the questions that have come in, I mean, one of them, and this goes back again to what we talked about earlier, is in terms of Hadoop on-prem versus in the cloud, why or what would be the advantage other than scalability or governance? And I'd say the ability to quickly spin up. So that's not just scalability, because that would be changing size, but just spin up and turn down and then join with these new data sets, like we were just talking about this data exchange. Well, that'd be a reason to bring up an environment in the cloud, pay only for what you use, join with these other data sets locally in the cloud environment, and then use something like QueryGrid to connect back to your on-prem Hadoop environment. So that's a great example of the power of and. It's not or, it's not on-prem or cloud, it's and, right? It's a hybrid environment. And given that Teradata software is the same in both places, makes it very easy to do that. You don't have to retool, recode, retrain, etc. Teradata for the longest time has recognized the value of data sharing. In fact, one of Teradata's early and very famous customer, Walmart, one of the ways they were able to transform retail was to open up their data, their inventory data, to their suppliers, literally thousands of suppliers, let the suppliers manage the inventory, the supply chains, the shelf stocking, et cetera, rather than doing it centrally. And that just, I mean, we know how huge Walmart has grown, right? I mean, it transformed that. And so that was an early example from like 30 years ago. And many, customers since in a variety of industries, same thing. You've got partner data, you want to open things up to customers, you've got supplier data, open it up, whether it's through secure zones, which is part of Vantage, whether you add third-party encryption, companies like Protegrity or Talis for Metric, row level encryption, column level. I mean, these are all capabilities inherent within or optionally added to Vantage on AWS. So you're checking the box on governance, you're checking the box on ease of use, and you're giving the power to the users to get access to the data they need to do the best analytics to drive revenue, reduce cost, innovate, you name it. So David, back to you. Let's hit number 5.
All right, number 5, and I promise to be snappy for people that are hanging out with us. And this is really my current passion, machine learning. So you've probably heard a lot about it. You may have a VP that says I need a machine learning too. That happens. If we're wrong about the impact, machine learning is still going to be as revolutionary as the SaaS delivery model was when it came on the scene. If we're right, it could be a technology as consequential as internet. Either way, huge opportunity. The activity we see in the field supports survey results that show that 9 out of 10 companies are investing in ML. And this is where the use of the data lake approach leads to better, faster, and smarter decisions. So one of the keys to machine learning is that the more data you have, the better you are to train models, the more accurate your model, right? So collect all of that in your data lake, and to folks wondering what information to keep in the data lake. Try to limit what you edit, because you're not quite sure what's going to be valuable in the future. And again, as I said, as the cost of marginal storage approaches 0, that's not a difficult decision to make. You can discard derived data because you could always process it out again, but that's going to kind of be based on kind of your particular needs. So machine learning engineers need flexibility. So that's where you get the schema on read. From a data lake architecture and the tools that live on top of that. And finally, the other big thing that ML needs is scalability. And you really need to be able to scale storage and compute independently. You really have 2 types of compute in this situation too, whether that's CPU or GPU. And then the best way to run ML is being able to run processing without data movement. So if you have that S3 as your storage point and your tools are nicely integrated like Vantage to S3, then you really have an opportunity there. If you have all those things in place, you can start to do machine learning. But there is one more pitfall along the way. When I work with customers and we see them struggling with machine learning, it typically falls into one of 2 situations. And we saw this with analytics at the dawn of time too. The first thing to really understand, this sounds very basic, but get the business metrics right. Like, what is the exact problem that you're trying to solve? Because if you can't get really crisp about that problem, it's really hard to build a solution. Don't say that you want your business to be more efficient. Say that, how can I figure out which customers are more likely to churn, and how can I contact those customers specifically with an offer? On the back end, we see folks struggle because, frankly, and I feel this very deeply, is that the DevOps folks have not fully internalized ML ops processes. And we have a blog post out there that talks through it. But the function of deploying ML models is different than straight up application code. It looks far more like a database migration than an app deployment, which means new skills, right? Upskilling your team in teaching them these new methods, bringing in the right tooling so that they can monitor things like concept drift, right? Which a lot of typical monitoring tools do not do very well. Bringing that in and kind of changing how they operate is really the key to getting these models to production. And like many things, once you've done it once, you can do it multiple times. The first time is really the hardest. And I do want to make a quick mention of our AI services. So if you're a developer listening to this and you've been asked to develop personalization or identify fraud or translate languages, we do have top-level AI services that are built to do one thing really, really well, nothing else. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel unless you like inventing wheels. Go for it. We like inventors. But if you don't want to reinvent the wheel, these are services that you can hook into with all of our standard APIs to be able to do that. Whether you're ADP using machine learning to predict workforce turnover, or Thomson Reuters providing natural language Q&A, you can do this on AWS. So Brian, if you want to take us to the bridge, I want to thank everybody for listening to me pontificate for 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, you bet. So let me just a few things on machine learning. Number one, machine learning functions are embedded in Teradata Vantage. If you recall, we acquired a company called Aster Data 6-ish, 8-ish years ago, and we've taken that intellectual property and integrated in Vantage. So what used to be Teradata Database and Aster are separate platforms, we've combined them into Vantage. So those functions are literally embedded in there. So with one command, like XGBoost, for example, you can do what formerly took many lines of code from a highly skilled data scientist. So it democratizes machine learning for the business analyst to become the citizen data scientist. There's also the ability to integrate with and interoperate with external machine learning things, external from Vantage, like Amazon SageMaker, right? So not only are there functions within Vantage itself, but there's APIs and connectivity to cloud first-party services so that we and our customers can take advantage of the rapid pace of innovation on AWS. So it's the power of and. It's not either Teradata or AWS. It's both and combined in the environment that you like, and can take advantage of all the data that we talked about, whether it's in Hadoop or now much more popular object storage based data lakes. So I know we're coming up on the end of our time. Number of questions like pricing, for example. Pricing is both on AWS Marketplace and on the Teradata website. You can go to teradata.com/AWS, very easy to remember, and you'll see not only product information, but pricing. We lead with as a service, so we provision the environment in your single tenant VPC. We manage that all for you, and we don't touch your data. We're not doing your analytics, so there is that wall of privacy there. We do have professional services if you want that help, that assistance. We do that, all day long for hundreds of household brand name companies. So, lots to learn there. Please do check out the website. You can learn about customers using Vantage on AWS, like Bayer Crop Sciences, Brinker International, Hertz Corporation, Larry H. Miller, owner of the Utah Jazz basketball team, Medibank and Tabcorp in Australia, Meredith, True Value, on and on and on. So lots of big name customers. You can see case studies, videos, webinars, and so on. So David, thank you so much for joining us on this LinkedIn Live.
It was fun. It was super fun. And AWS and Vantage is better together. So is Brian Wood and David Potes. I would be remiss not to thank you guys for being a gold sponsor for reInvent, which is our yearly conference. Interestingly, it'll be 100% virtual this year, which means I may actually get to see some of the talks. But really excited that you guys can be a part of this again. I did want to address one quick question. So hang on with me for one sec. Did get a couple of questions about real-time versus kind of historical analytics, and I can give you the grand unified theory. Think of all analytics as having a temporal component, right? So 3 questions I want to be able to ask is, what happened in the past, right? That's typically my historical data. What is happening right now? That is typically real-time data, often from IoT devices. I think somebody asked about IoT. Bring your data. And then machine learning is what is going to happen in the future. Every time you think of machine learning, replace that term with prediction, and you'll be right 95% of the time. So thanks, Brian.
Yeah. In fact, I'll add two more to your three, is not only what's going to happen, but why, and then what do we do about it? And so
Yep.
that's what Teradata customers are doing with Vantage, is not only the prediction, but the, okay, how do I best take
Now
advantage
what?
of this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So great stuff. Thanks for mentioning reInvent. We're super excited. We're cloud first. This is very important to us, and we're looking forward to being there. Check out the website. Tune in to reInvent. It's free to all the users, right? The physical event is not free. This virtual event is completely free. So take advantage. Check out our booth. Talk to subject matter experts, white papers, see demos. Talk to us about consumption pricing. Pay only for what you use. Lots of good stuff. So thank you again, David. You've been great, and appreciate your partnership. All right. Thanks, gang. We'll see you.
Thank you.